Thank you so very much. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligentsia prior to the hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come. Rachel, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance, will you please indicate that you are present when your name is called? Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Vice Chair Derek Green.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, fellow members of the Council. President, looking forward for today's conversation.
Councilmember Brian O'Neill.
Present. Good morning.
Councilmember David O.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, colleagues.
Councilmember Helen Gim.
Good morning, everybody. I am present.
Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Good morning. I am present.
Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Present.
And we are also joined by Councilmember Alan Dom.
I'm present. Thank you.
As well as Councilmember Kendra Brooks, whose bill is being heard today.
Good morning. I'm present.
Thank you. A quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Law and Government regarding Bill numbers 210206 and 210249 and resolution numbers 210215 and 210295. Rachel, will you please read the titles of the bills and resolutions?
210206, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified electors of the City of Philadelphia of an amendment to Article VIII, Chapter 5 of the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter, entitled Referenda Approved by the Voters, by adding a new section providing that the citizens of Philadelphia call upon the Pennsylvania General Assembly and the governor to pass legislation that will decriminalize, regulate, and tax the use and sale to adults aged 21 years or older of cannabis for non-medical purposes. 210249, an ordinance amending various chapters of the Philadelphia Code to amend the definitions of certain terms and provide protections for persons affected by coercive control, including in the context of employment discrimination, employment leave, and housing protections, and making technical changes all under certain terms and conditions. 210215, a resolution submitting to the electors of the city an amendment to Article VIII, Chapter 5 of the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter entitled Referenda Approved by the Voters, by adding a new section providing that the citizens of Philadelphia call upon the Pennsylvania General Assembly and the governor to pass legislation that will decriminalize, regulate, and tax the use and sale to adults aged 21 years or older of cannabis for non-medical purposes. And 210295, a resolution authorizing the Committee on Law and Government to hold hearings examining the decision to permanently move sheriff sales online and further to explore the ramifications of and any unintended consequences that may arise from this decision.
Thank you, Rachel. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. With this being said, before Rachel calls the first panel, I would like to ask Council Member Green and any other members if they would like to make opening comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief this morning in reference to the two pieces of legislation before us in the Law and Government Committee to put on the ballot a question for the voters of the citizens of Philadelphia regarding recreational cannabis. For those who may not be aware, both New York, New Jersey, and Virginia recently have adopted recreational cannabis in their states. We as a state has allowed medical or medicinal cannabis to be allowed for those that have various health ailments where this type of medications been helpful for them. I first became exposed to the whole concept of medical cannabis based on my work in the autism community, and there are those in the community who are very supportive of cannabis that's been able to help them in reference to their quality of life. But when the Commonwealth made that decision, that was done at a point before voters in the city of Philadelphia had an opportunity to weigh in. There's been various bills that have been introduced in the General Assembly regarding recreational cannabis. And I think that to provide some perspective and get some input from the citizens of the city of Philadelphia, I think it was important to have this type of legislation on the ballot to give citizens the opportunity to weigh in and provide their input and thoughts regarding this issue before the Commonwealth decides to move forward with legislation. I think it's important for the city of Philadelphia, which is the only city of the first class, and so both a city and a county, weigh in on this issue to really give the voters in the city of brotherly love and I would say sisterly effectiveness the opportunity to give their perspective on this issue. A number of states are moving in this regard. As you can tell, just based on my opening comment, there are states around us that have already moved from this perspective. One, to provide economic benefits for those states, and two, also, there's been a disparate impact of how this product has impacted people in our city and in our Commonwealth from a criminal justice perspective and a civil rights perspective. So with that, I want to bring this legislation through the Law and Government Committee to give an opportunity for citizens in our city to weigh in on this issue before the Commonwealth makes a decision regarding legislation in this regard. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chairman and Council Member Green. Are there any other members of the committee who wish to make comments? For the record, I want to acknowledge that I see that Council Member and our Majority Whip, Council Member Jones, is present, and I also see that Council Member Cindy Bass is here. Council Member Bass and Council Member Jones, you want to just say hello for the record?
Hello. What a wonderful day post verdict.
Thank you, Council Member Bass.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair. I want to echo my colleague's sentiments regarding yesterday's historic verdict, but I also wanted to say I want to thank the sponsor of this resolution for his thoughtfulness. As a district member of council, I hear both sides of it. I hear people who are very much interested in the legalization of cannabis, and I hear people who have great concern about the legalization in their neighborhoods and what that means. So I think that this is a great opportunity for folks to weigh in on the conversation and to provide feedback and input to us in terms of how they would like to see this matter handled. So I'm looking forward to the dialogue today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member Bass. With that being said, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify this morning on Bill number 210206 and Resolution number 210215.
Steve Shane, and Sharon Perry Thomas.
I see you, Steve. Sharon. Okay, and I see you as well, Sharon. I want to say good morning to both of you. You are connected and ready to proceed. The only thing I ask is that you state your name for the record, and please proceed with your testimony. And Stephen, we're going to make you an honorary member of this council. We just saw you not long ago. So why don't you go first and please proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members, my old pal Sharon. Hey Sharon, how you doing? My name is Steve Shane, and I have been admitted to practice law in Pennsylvania since 1989, maintaining offices in the beautiful city of Philadelphia for 31 years. I presently practice law at the Hoban Law Group. We are 54 attorneys. We have 17 offices across the globe, and all we do is legalize marijuana, industrial hemp, and a burgeoning practice in hallucinogens. My dirty secret is my background is in financial services, and I spent the bulk, 25 of my 32 years at the bar, representing banks. Today I offer testimony in support of Bill number 21206 with companion resolution 210-215 to amend Philadelphia's Home Rule Charter to call upon Pennsylvania's General Assembly and Governor to pass legislation decriminalizing, regulating, and taxing the use and sales to adults ages 21 or older of cannabis for a non-medical purpose. My remarks today will have 4 sections. What is actually medical cannabis? What is adult use cannabis? Decriminalization, regulation, and creation of jobs and tax revenue. There is widespread ignorance of what adult use marijuana is, and let me explain it to you. I am holding up a highlighter. This highlighter assumed this is medical cannabis. Now I'm putting it in my left hand. It is the same thing. If you went to any dispensary anywhere across America that has medical and adult use marijuana, they are the identical items. There's nothing particularly magical that separates medical from adult use cannabis. It is the same item. You may have heard me use the term adult use cannabis. That is a term we use. If you want recreation, you go to Dorney Park. This is an item for sale. When you put the word recreation with it, you suggest it's being sold at schoolyards and to children. It is not. Cannabis that is in the adult use sector can only be sold to those 21 years and older. The best way to fight illegal marijuana is by legalizing adult use cannabis. Why? Well, it's cheaper. And what happens is when people go with what's cheaper, and if you don't believe me, have you had a glass of bathtub gin recently? You haven't, because illegal stills were knocked out by the legalization of alcohol following prohibition. So if you want to get drug dealers and illegal revenue out of the streets of the Commonwealth, and most particularly the city of Philadelphia, the best way is to have adult use cannabis. But let's talk about what adult use cannabis might mean to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which has approximately 12.8 million residents. Illinois has 12.6 million residents. And last year, from its first year of adult use marijuana, it generated $670 million in revenue. In the first quarter of 2021, Illinois, which has 200,000 fewer residents than Pennsylvania, generated $109 million in purchases, 31% from out-of-state visitors. It is on track to do over $1 billion, Illinois, in the second year of program. And here's the kicker. In the first quarter of 2021, Illinois generated $86,537,000 in adult use marijuana tax revenue as compared to the $72,280 million it made from liquor sales. So if we use Illinois as an example, it's better for tax revenue, adult use cannabis, than it is alcohol. So I'm a lawyer. I usually think of the dollars and cents arguments first because I like revenue. I like creation of jobs. But let's really look at the first issue, which is decriminalization of adult use cannabis. As of 2019 figures, 31.6 million Americans over the age of 18 use cannabis monthly, and that would come up to somewhere about over 1 million Pennsylvanians over the 18 are monthly cannabis users. Now, think of the amount of money that is spent on the police force to go after these people. And think again, too, about the amount of costs that are imposed on incarcerating these people. If you're picked up for a de minimis possession of cannabis, the cost average in Pennsylvania, according to the figures I have, is $79,000 a year to incarcerate somebody for cannabis. As we've talked about recently, and as Sharon will say a heck of a lot better than I have, that the criminal prosecution for cannabis offenders falls disproportionately on African Americans, and even more disproportionately on African American men. If you are an African American man, you have one chance in three of being picked up on some silly de minimis possession charges. And once you get in the system, it's awful. Nothing good comes from it. If we think about what that does, the costs and just the processing, it is ridiculous. But think about one of the many lessons that will take years, if not decades, to come on the Derek Chauvin conviction is how awful the system is for a lot of people. Police are put in ridiculous situations. They are not trained. They do not know social services. What if we took the money to better train our police force instead of having chasing ridiculous de minimis things? Provide better salaries, better training, teach people how to do social services. I mean, that's really where the money should go. Now, that's the good news. Here's the bad news. We weren't the first ones at the party. So when I talk about cannabis, and again, I'm happy to take your questions after I make the presentations, we look at regions. Illinois is in a region where there's not a lot of adult use cannabis if you look at the surrounding states. Pennsylvania needs to catch up a little bit. New Jersey has already passed their adult use. There are 9 million people in New Jersey. New York has passed a statute. Jersey's program could launch any minute now. The regulations could allow the existing people to sell adult use. That means Pennsylvanians are going to leave the beautiful Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and go to the nearly as beautiful state of New Jersey and spend their dollars there. I don't like that. Delaware, Maryland are up on this too. We sort of need to catch up with everybody. And Jersey has the right idea in terms of regulation. That's really important in legalized marijuana. New Jersey, I think, has set the standard on the East Coast for regulation. Why do I say that? They've created what's called the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. Now, medical marijuana comes through the Pennsylvania Department of Health, which has done fantastic. I'm very happy with the Pennsylvania Department of Health. But I think we need a special organization solely designed to handle cannabis. And that's what Jersey did. They're handing the reins from the Jersey Department of Health to their Cannabis Regulatory Commission. In terms of policing it, to make sure it's fair, there's a couple other wonderful goals in the regulation. Number one, we take pride in legalized marijuana that we're slightly better than the rest of American industries in the promotion of females and doing community impact and diversity, but that's most seen in the adult use. When medical marijuana comes to town, usually you see multi-state operators, which are wonderful and serve their goal. They do a great job. I have no quibble with them, but I like the little guy and I like the little gal even more. And the thing is that if you look in Jersey's adult use statute, they have all kinds of residency requirements. They have all kinds of diversity points added. If you're a veteran or one's own organization, it's even better. So cannabis is at its best in the adult use for advancing societal needs. Now, that's a quick overview. I am more than happy if you have more time to answer any question. There's a lot there. But the fact of the matter is, I guess in conclusion, there's a reason why we're the city of first class. We set the standard for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I love all of Pennsylvania, but I like Philadelphia just a bit more. And I think we were the right person to send the message to our governor, who's doing a great job, and everybody else, and say, guys, it's time to pick up the pace. We need to make sure we don't lose dollars from Pennsylvania. Let's generate dollars. Let's make life better for all Pennsylvanians. With that, I can either answer questions or wait till the other panel members have spoken.
No, thank you so much for your testimony. Sharon, can you just state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony?
Yes, I am Sharon Perry Thomas. And thank you so much, City Council members who are on this committee on law and government. And I thank my City Councilwoman, Cindy Bass, who's a district that I reside. And we are in support of this bill 21-02-0600. I'm a member of several organizations, including DACO, which stands for the Diasporic Alliance for Cannabis Opportunities. And our intention for the last several years has been to bring about awareness of wellness, education, and economic empowerment opportunities to Black and Brown communities. We believe in reinvestment in our communities, and we think that cannabis can be part of that solution. I'm also a founding member of the Philadelphia Cannabis Business Association, and I'm the social equity advocate for All Together Now, as well as the Pennsylvania Director of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. And when it comes to the cannabis industry, Black and Brown people have been pushed to the side. Folks in our community continue to be arrested and marginalized in this industry. Steve spoke earlier about MSOs. Our whole state is an MSO. There are no Black and Brown owned dispensaries, cannabis businesses here in this state, and we need to change that. Our communities remain damaged by the failed war on drugs. And so we believe that the benefits for our city, for our state, and really our whole entire country from the legalization of cannabis can really help to repair the communities from the harm that they have been so devastated by. So I know in this bill it talks about taxation and what it can do. We believe that it can do a lot. You know, within just that first year of medical alone under the Pennsylvania Act 16, I mean, it was just months before it topped over $500 million for our state. The revenue from cities like Evanston, Illinois, was tremendous. Evanston, Illinois, actually had the first reparations bill, and they called it the reparations bill because over $500,000 was able to be set aside for Black residents of Evanston, Illinois, to pay for their mortgages, to pay for their rent, to help fix their houses. It went toward housing for those citizens. And so we think that a very proper tax structure like that could be emulated here in Pennsylvania. So not only just housing, we deal with issues of education. We all know that. We deal with issues of mental health. We know that. So let's see how we can generate some great taxation, some income that can come into our communities and help to repair them. So cannabis taxation, cannabis business is really, really key and important. And we can't get that without the regulation. Right now, yesterday was 420. It was a big day for folks in the cannabis industry. And there were parties everywhere, I'm sure. There were events everywhere, I'm sure. But because it's not regulated, we could not benefit from the tax from all those events that were going on yesterday. And so when we look at it, the regulation does not help to sort of bring in the taxation, but it also helps to ensure safety. I sit on the board of Americans for Safe Access, which is an organization in DC. And I know for a fact that because of unsafe cannabis use and products, many people have been harmed. We don't want that in our neighborhoods. We don't want that on our streets. You can almost go to any one of these corner stores and you can see product that is not safe for our community. We don't want that. In decriminalization, I recently did a survey with the University of the Sciences. And one of the questions that was asked was, has anyone ever been affected, or do you know anyone who has been affected by the war on drugs? And out of all the questions on that survey, the one question that was 100% was that question. Because cannabis has been criminalized since 1927. So there are actually people who are still alive today who probably remember going into the pharmacy or growing cannabis. This decriminalization is something that has to take place, and it has to take place now. But for our communities, it's more than just decrim, because decrim, basically what that will do is say, okay, so you're sort of in a safe zone. Here's a $25 ticket. Well, we have people who can't even pay their parking tickets. So in our community, decriminalization does not go far enough. We need for this industry to be regulated. So decriminalization is good, but again, we need more. We need businesses. We need microloans. We need craft businesses. We need more for our communities in this city to actually benefit from this industry. It is an emerging industry. It's a growing industry. And it's an industry that is here to stay. And so I am asking you who are on this committee today to really think about some of the things that we have said. Talk to your constituents. Reach out to us. We can help. We can give you, some of the information and answer some of the questions that you have probably been seeking and some of your constituents have probably come to you for. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I thank you so much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, both Steve and Sharon, for your testimony. We have three members in queue, and I want to just start with two questions. And Sharon, you open this up for me. No black and brown cannabis-owned dispensaries. No black and brown cannabis-owned dispensaries. With this being said, Steve and Sharon, I want you to tell me, if you will, in all of the states where we have seen legalization occur, has there been any innovative strategies or approaches that seek to develop formal apprenticeship programs? Sherelle, what are you talking about? We talk about apprenticeship programs in construction, in medicine, and across the board. So when I think about those, particularly black and brown men and women who have been engaging in the underground economy, I say, wow, here we are on the precipice of possibly legalizing recreational marijuana in the Commonwealth. What impact will that also have on the underground economy, right? And then what are the opportunities available for Black and brown people to say, hey, you've been engaged, in this activity. You may know something about quality, about different types. Is there any way to provide a technical skill set to ensure that people get access to the legal supports they need, the accounting supports that they need, so that they can become those Black and brown owners, Sharon, that you just mentioned? And I'll tell you why I asked this question. I'm reading an article from the New York Times that was published on March the 31st. They updated it on April the 1st. And the article is about New York legalizing recreational marijuana, and they tied the move to racial equity, right? Yeah. Where under their law, 40% of that tax revenue from cannabis is going to be steered to minority communities that had a disproportionate number of marijuana arrests during that war on drugs. So in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, innovative, great to tie the two. But here in Pennsylvania, I know if you don't get it's like going to school. If you don't get access to formal training about how you enter the industry, you'll remain in the underground economy. So, Steve and Sharon, tell us, if we will, are there any formal apprenticeship programs to teach, all people, but Black and brown people in particular, about how to legally enter this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I can say with one of the national organizations that belong to Minorities for Medical Marijuana, they do have programs like that. Obviously, in the state of Pennsylvania, we don't have anything like that yet. However, yesterday, when I spoke to the committee in Harrisburg around this new adult use bill, that was definitely one of the things that they spoke of, because I asked this question because it is a question that's very dear to me, because I see young men, I see young women, and they're doing things under the table. And for me, as a taxpaying citizen, I see what you're doing, but understand that that's not improving my schools. That's not improving my schools, my streets. That's not improving my neighborhoods. So I need for you to take that and bring that into a regulated market, so that now this money can start flowing into our neighborhoods. And so for me, as a taxpaying citizen, I want to grab all of these people and say, you too can be a part of this, because right now they're not seeing it. They see dispensaries and they know that they're out. But an adult use bill and support towards social equity funding. So having the bill is great, but what New York did is that they added revenue to the to fund the programs that they want. So yes, having the apprenticeships, having the trainings, having low interest to no interest loans. These are the ways that people are going to be able to enter the space. So going back to your question, one of the things that the senator said yesterday is that they would possibly look at working with many of the companies, the multi-state operators, MSOs, that are here in the state for programs like that. And so, again, it is something that's key, and it's a conversation that we need for you all to continue to have, and we need for you all to continue to find the funds to support such programs.
Steve?
Can you hear me? Okay. I view things, although I agree with Sharon and everything, but I view things a little bit different in the setup of it. So let's break it down a little bit. And I also teach cannabis law at Stockton University, which is one of 5 universities in the nation that offers a minor in cannabis studies. So I have a little bit of understanding, because my most important thing, other than advancing, is getting the students JOBSs, which is something that I'd like to see from their college degree. So let's talk about the entire community, and then we'll break it down to their specific questions, Madam Chair. In legalized marijuana, we have 2 different sectors. That is what's called plant touching, and that's what's called non-plant touching. Plant touching is people who grow, process, sell, transport legalized marijuana, which we'll use to include both medical and adult use. The second sector is what's called non-plant touching, and there are people who provide support, software, legal services, insurance, banking. That's called the non-plant touching. So in terms of jobs, those are entire arenas of things that can be helpful to people who are disadvantaged. And that's really the key buzzword. And all the really great legislation that we're seeing, that something goes to communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So what I did while Sharon was talking is I pulled out my analysis of the New Jersey statute, and I want to tell you what they're doing and what I think is the right thing for what Pennsylvania could do. Okay, so in addition to creating the Commission on Cannabis Regulatory Commission, they create a subgroup called the Office of Minority, Disabled Veterans, and Women Cannabis Business Development. So a subcommittee is geared especially to deal with all the stuff that Sharon spoke so beautifully about. Now, in legalized marijuana, we have two things that we do. Number one, get the licenses, which is on a competitive basis. And number two, grow, process, sell, and transport marijuana. Getting a license is based on points. Whoever gets the most point wins. And it's in some ways kind of subjective. So under New Jersey's setup, at least 25 of businesses would go to micro businesses, which favor local residents capped at residents. 15% would be reserved for minority-owned businesses. 15% would go to businesses owned by women and veterans. 35% would be conditional. What does that mean? Well, as Shireen said, and it's not a bad thing. It just is. It's a thing we're going to try and make better. It's economies of scale. There's a reason why CVS and Rite Aid dominate pharmacies. And multi-state operators have just been better at fundraising. They have some ownership that is from disadvantaged communities. The bulk of it is not. And it could be better. And it's the big dog. So in terms of getting businesses that are owned, that are not multi-state, and are owned by minority people, women and veterans, the conditional license would allow people of less means to compete. For example, during this call, New Jersey may have dropped their application for their adult use, and it's going to be a foot race. But it's not really going to be an equal foot race because some people already have property lined up, they have the funding, they're ready to submit an application. When you submit an application, you have one chance and 11. Any applicant has one chance and 11 of getting a license. And the person who has the biggest bankroll has the advantage. What Jersey does with their conditional license, it allows the people who are not better funded, it creates a level playing field. And what I said about originally that in terms of the scoring of applications, they're going to give higher scores to people with 25% of their employees from impact zones or municipalities negatively impacted by unemployment, poverty, or past marijuana activity. They have to also have what are called labor peace agreements. This is a little bit askance, but the fact of the matter is, and by full disclosure, I happen to represent a union, the Commercial Food Workers Union, but the fact of the matter is unions are a terrific bastion of diversity. I don't know if you've ever looked at the Commercial Food Workers Union, but it's just spectacular in terms of diversity it offers. And by going through unions, it's kind of like an additional safety net. So that's a really good start for doing stuff. Now, that's just for the plant touching. For me, if a client comes to me and says, I want to submit an application, and honestly, I'm mostly about the money, and I want to get my client, I'm a lawyer, but the fact of the matter is what's good for society is good for the application. So the first thing we say with clients is you got to get a team together of diversity in ownership, diversity in terms of the actual operational people. But for me, more importantly, is diversity in the subcontractors. You want someone to hang drywall? Are they a certified disadvantaged business? You want someone to provide accounting services? Are they a certified WBE woman-owned business? And that adds points under New Jersey's, which is, I think, the right way of doing that. But I want to talk about something else too, which was discussed. The tax revenue has two aspects to it, state and local. The local is called a hosting fee. So what happens is that the key is to make sure that the money gets directed. Now, it's all well and good to say, isn't this wonderful? We raised this millions of dollars, blah, blah, blah. But as Sharon said, the city of Evanston, Illinois, put the turkey on the table. They said, here's where it's going to. It's going for mortgages for people and stuff like that. So what we're seeing is, for example, in Colorado, where my law firm is based, the city of Aurora, which is next to the city of Denver, actually is much better for adult use marijuana. They create a much more business-friendly situation for their hosting fees. Each municipality can we get paid a certain amount, and then we can decide where it goes. So having said that, this is incentive for the city of Philadelphia to say, we want to take the lead. We want this here. That way we can generate revenue earmarked for the city of Philadelphia, which can better benefit the residents of the city of Philadelphia. Does that answer your questions, Madam Chair?
Yes. So, Steve and Sharon, I want to say thank you for your response. And I'm going to get to my colleagues, but I do have to say this for the record. From my colleague, Council Member Alan Dom, I'm continuing to compare and contrast that with a job, you make a living. When you own, you are able to build wealth. So, Steve, when you talked about being a professor at Stockton and just teaching because this industry is just booming, I say that is a great opportunity. But I would really love for the men and women who have made and put themselves on the line by being engaged in the underground economy, who may not be members of our Temples and our LaSalle's and our, other undergraduate colleges, to be able to have access to an opportunity to get some training. So maybe if it's not those, undergraduate institutions, I can think of a wonderful institution called the Community College of Philadelphia, Philadelphia's college, right? That would be able to, work with all of those firms that are engaged. And you just gave me a lesson. There's plant touching and non-plant touching. I never knew, what that was like. And so Councilmember Green, the leader of this legislation and who's been our leader on this issue in council, I would love it, Member Green, if we in this council could write a unified letter to the Pennsylvania General Assembly formally asking that they include an innovative, even if they do a pilot, right, just for the city of Philadelphia, that has low barriers to entry, right? Don't tell me about the formal GED, and do I have to have an associate's or, an undergraduate degree. But if there is a learn and earn program that's housed at a place like CCP, where all the different firms that Sharon talked about and Steve talked about who are in the industry, that they are helping, now we're removing barriers to entry to the people who put their lives on the line to help drive this industry before it became illegal. So I just wanted to formally put that on the record, and thank you both. And Steve, I think what you described when you and Sharon talked about Evanston, Illinois, you made me think about my PA House days and the tax on shale. And aside from the tax, we had local impact taxes, right? So wherever the shale was being drilled in that county in particular, they had a local impact tax. So they would generate revenue, but then there was the statewide revenue. So I support that as well. With that being said, the chair recognizes Councilmember Jones. What? Oh, Steve.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I want to say two things in response. Sorry to suck up so much of the oxygen, but what essentially you said, Madam Chair, is you want on-the-job training instead of a GET, OJT versus a GED. That's the pitch for that. And also on the good news, there's something else here that nobody really talks about, which is in terms of benefiting our population, it really doesn't have to do with cannabis. Cannabis is the beginning. Let me tell you how the story ends. Food and water are the new gold. Think about what you eat on a daily basis or what your kids eat on a daily basis versus what you ate. And what happens is food has to be sourced locally. And we've seen in America, but actually more interesting in Israel, they've been focusing on ag tech, urban grows of food. So the notion of preservation of green space in the city of Philadelphia and learning those skill sets. I have a client who I think Sharon knows, Dozy, who came up with a fungus. It's a fungus that he thought was going to help marijuana grow. But you know what? It actually grows tomatoes and every other stuff too. Now, I'm biased. He's my client, and I think he's terrific. But the fact of the matter is he intended to zig, and he zagged into food and ag tech, which is really the future, and that's what we used to focus on. With that, I'm going to cast a little sadness here. We're talking about root beer. Marijuana is not the panacea. It's like root beer. It's a commodity. And I think a lot of people think, and no disrespect to what Councilperson Dom said, but you know something? Most businesses fail. Most businesses fail for a lack of capitalization, and most marijuana businesses, despite who owns them, have a more higher failure rate. It's a fluky business. You hear about the home runs, you don't hear about the strikeouts. So, in my opinion, I want people to get 401ks. I want people to have health care benefits. That, to me, is the value. That makes me excited. I know everybody wants to be a capital industry, and that's wonderful, but sell the steak, not the sizzle.
Listen, I think we agree. It's not either or. We're talking about and. We want both. Chair recognizes Councilmember Jones. Councilmember, you're on mute.
Sign of my age. So on the issue of age, I'm old enough to remember when cable came to Philadelphia and how it was packaged as the solution for minority entrepreneurship and how minorities were going to get in on the ground level of the gold rush of cable. Names like James Wade and others, and it wound up being the last man standing. Will Daniels is the last company that survived those franchise days and gold rush and how it was going to change the game for minority companies. I was in the Minority Business Enterprise Council as its president then, so I remember. I also know that when gambling came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, how people sold the fact that it was going to change the lives of seniors and how they would never be poor again and that they would always benefit from the dollars that came in and how the little stores in our community would also benefit from it. To some degree that was true, and to some degree that was oversold. And now I kind of feel like, and this might be a mistake of my head, but no, not my heart, that I have come from a district where we've had to suffer pill mills, where, you know, these pills were brought into our community, prescriptions were given away like gifts, and it wound up being the source of addiction for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Philadelphians. So pardon me if I'm a little cynical about marijuana. When we had the legalization of marijuana, and I share this with my leader, where she valiantly fought the distribution of medical marijuana in her district and successfully did so. We weren't so successful in my district, where we had 3 dispensaries within a mile of each other. And the fear and why we fought so ferociously was that someday, this day would come, and that there was a little known clause that if you can distribute medical, you may be able to distribute recreational, which was a nightmare to some of our communities. I would go and ask this body, yes, you told me about the wonderful stories where there is linked prosperity, linked development, but was there a downside in any of those states? Did you gonna wait until I'm done? I'll listen to you, sir. Give me a second. Be patient. I know I talk a little long, but so do you. All right. I remember having to deal with a lot of these problems that came in my district, and we've finally got our arms around it. But lo and behold, what some of the cynical people said that would happen, here we are on this day thinking about that possibility. So I'd like to know, in the municipalities that have had a head start on this gold rush, what some of the downsides were. Were there increases in intoxicated driving? Were there increases to legalization? Before you paint me as the old man saying, get off my lawn, I was a co-author, co-sponsor of the decriminalization legislation along with now Mayor Kenny. So I understand its importance. I understand that a lot of our community has been criminalized. I just took a tour of the prisons on State Road, and you'd be surprised how many of those gun charges had some trace to some type of BUFA charge, but also dealing of controlled substances charges as well. So I'm looking at this holistically. I'm not going to be easily swayed. I'm not closed to new ideas, but I'm not from Missouri, but I'm from West Philly. You're going to have to show me. All right. And with that, thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I have a point of information.
Chair recognizes Councilmember Green, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Specifically, both the state legislation that allowed medical cannabis as well as our local legislation specifically stated it could not allow for recreational cannabis.
Thank you for that point of information. And I just need to state for the record, because we were not anti-medical marijuana, but identified that that particular location was not appropriate as it's close proximity to a daycare in the middle of a residential community. I can't put my finger on it right now, Councilmember Green, but remember, I went through that zoning hearing about Stenton Avenue, and there was a loophole. There was a loophole in the law, and that's what Councilmember and Majority Whip Jones is referring to. That, and I don't have it in front of me because I wasn't prepared, right, to address the issue, but there was a loophole that the opposing counsel constantly referred to during the midst of that. And then I can't remember if it was state law, if it was the way we wrote ours, but I will argue to you that when we were in front of that zoning board, there was a loophole, and maybe it was Philadelphia, maybe it was what we did, but it was a loophole. And so I know what you're referring to, Whip Jones.
Madam Chair, if I could
yes
respond.
yes Vice Chair Green.
Yes, yeah, there was some perspective in reference to the distance from a location, but the legislation that was drafted for the city of Philadelphia and the state legislation that dealt with medical cannabis specifically stated this would not allow recreational cannabis. It was very explicit in that legislation, both at the state level and the local level, because these issues did come up when the state legislation was being considered.
Thank you, Chair. Recognizes Whip Jones.
Thank you so very much. So here's the problem with your theory, Member Green, and you're a lawyer, so therefore I stand unarmed in the debate. However, as a district council person, the same attractive nature that City Avenue posed for the medical distribution would be the same attractive nature that it would pose for the recreational distribution, whether it was in my district on City Avenue or on Main Street where it was welcomed, right? So what I don't want is a proliferation of medical, recreational, marijuana in my areas of my district where that attracts a wider audience. The problem with City Avenue was that folk were going to come from as far away as the counties to come to City Avenue because in certain areas of the suburbs, they weren't having it. So I have a responsibility, Councilman, as a district council person, to look out for the communities in which these facilities are housed.
And Madam Chair, if I could just respond to that point, and having worked for it.
Now, this is, and now just for the record, the chair is going to recognize Vice Chair and Councilmember Green, but this is the last volley that you guys go ahead because Councilman Green, you're next. You're up next anyway.
Well, no, I just want to. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to state for the record that Councilmember Jones has supported dispensaries in his district, and he also raised a concern that, well, let me finish. He supported near neighbors who want, from my understanding, correct if I'm wrong, supported near neighbors who were okay with a dispensary in a different part of the district as opposed to City Avenue. So what I'm saying is that I just want to make sure the record is clear that Councilmember Jones, the issue you raised was the location of that location for that medical cannabis dispensary, and the points that you raised, because it does border both Philadelphia and Montgomery County, that from my observation raised a concern that neighbors had that if there was recreational cannabis or adult use cannabis in the future, people would also want to have those locations at City Avenue. So I just want to state for the record, from my perspective, that you're not stating in opposition, but a concern that neighbors brought to you, just like other council members had, in reference to the location of this type of use. My point was to say that specifically in the legislation, it stated that you could not have recreational cannabis under the medical cannabis legislation was passed. However, that does not discount the very real concern that people have when you have a new type of business coming into a community, especially in a location like City Avenue, which borders Philadelphia and Montgomery County. That would be attractive for someone in the future if there was adult cannabis to try to locate there, and that raised a number of concerns, which I know Councilman Jones was very active in addressing to support the issues raised by his constituents.
Madam Chair, for correction, please.
Chair recognizes Councilmember Whip Jones.
Right.
Madam Chair, there's a difference in not standing in opposition to something as opposed to being in support of something. So in one case, which was Main Street, I didn't oppose because that's what the community wanted. But in another area that vehemently opposed medical dispensaries because of the pill mills that they experienced prior to that, I stood with them in protest. And I would go on to further say that I opposed overlapping zoning legislation that prohibited certain types of corner stores that sell drug paraphernalia. That is a proliferation in my certain areas of my community, yet not in others. So therefore, and because of, I am viewing this with a jaundiced eye because of the negative impact it often has in parts of my district.
And Madam Chair, I'll just revise.
One second.
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure.
No. But
I gotta go.
No, Madam Chair, I'm just going to revise my statement to say I support what Councilmember Jones said.
Excuse me, Councilmember, the chair now formally and officially recognizes Councilmember Green because he is second in queue. So now it is your time to ask questions or make comments, Vice Chair and Member Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Councilmember Jones. If I misspoke, I did not mean to say that you supported, but that you did not oppose. That's the point I was trying to get to. I just wanted the record to be clear that there have been dispensaries in the district and that you did not oppose some application based on the support of your neighbors. And that was the purpose of my point. Going back to Mr. Shane and Ms. Perry Thomas, I want to thank both of you for your testimony this morning. And you both brought up a lot of information, and I just as you were both talking, made me think about how this industry has come through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's had a very high barrier of entry for especially Black and brown entrepreneurs or women-owned entrepreneurs to get into this industry. The only African-American, well, I knew there was 2 African-American applicants. One no longer were able to receive a license because they were not able to move forward, and that was
Agromed.
And then you did have Masogi, who did start a layer, and then he was able to sell his dispensary. So he's the only person of color that I'm familiar with, African American in particular, that was successful and able to get a license and open up a dispensary in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, albeit outside the city of Philadelphia. But I think when you talked about the adult use opportunities, and it's going to have a better opportunity for those in a grassroots or small business perspective to take advantage of this industry with some of the concerns and challenges that people have already raised. What have you seen in other cities, in other jurisdictions that have enabled that to occur, to allow business owners to get into this industry, especially those who've had, and as I think Ms. Perry Thomas really articulately described it, who in the underground economy, and we now want to get them into the above ground economy, so they're providing revenues for the city of Philadelphia and having opportunities to create a real sustainable business. What states have done a good job in allowing that? Because I know there's been a lot of barriers for those who've had any type of criminal activity from even getting into this industry. And I'm curious what's happened in other states. And I'll just close when I think of one of the first people I learned and knew about this industry was Corey Barnett in D.C. with district growers. And I know and Corey's a fraternity brother. I've known him for some time. And when he talked about his business, District Growers, this is years ago, I thought it was an urban supermarket. So I was like, District Growers, okay, you're selling organic food. And then when Pennsylvania started to move into the medical cannabis industry, that's when I started to learn more about his business, because he was at one point looking to partner in the application. So I'm curious from that perspective, how do we really allow those in the communities that we're talking about to take advantage of adult use entrepreneurship opportunities?
So when you say, has there been any state? So understand, obviously, this is not new. Cannabis has been legalized in, I'll start off with California, I think since, the 1990s, right? And so just recently, within the last, say, 3 to 5 years, they have just started to establish social equity programs. So right now, many states are starting this adult use conversation with social equity language. But cities are just starting to catch up. States are just starting to catch up. And one of those that comes to mind is Oakland. Oakland, California has probably one of the best social equity programs around. Many of these fees for folks are very expensive. You look at some of the waiving of fees. Not only that, you look at many of the licenses that they can have. Earlier, Steve talked about touching and non-touching business. So within the plant touching world, you're looking at distribution, you're looking at your growers, like the district growers, you're looking at your retail establishments, you're looking at your processors, as well as your developers of things like edibles and stuff like that. And so they not only have lower barriers for the license, but they also have incubator programs. They also have training, and they also have funding available for many of those businesses. And so one of the groups I would definitely say that City Council should look at is called Supernova, because they have been on the front line of being able to establish some of these programs. Now, understand, one of the reasons that they have been able to establish these kind of programs is because they have not just been looking at a book or looking at TV to come up with these programs. These are people who are in the business. Many of these people were people who we would probably consider underground. And now these are legitimate businesses that are landing on the shelves of adult use as well as dispensary medical use companies throughout California. So when you look at it, we would definitely want to be clear that we are talking to people who know the business. And there are many people, I mentioned, the Philadelphia Cannabis Business Association. So we have a lot of folks in our city who know. And I just want to address Councilman Curtis Jones, whose office I have visited several times. I tried to get an appointment for almost 3 months, and I wasn't able to get an appointment. So when we come to you, please be open. And one of the interesting things about that experience is that as I was leaving, someone came out the door and said, how can I get a medical marijuana card? The person had to come out of the door and whisper to me, how do I get them? Something that is totally legal in our state. So when we look at the stigma is big, and it shouldn't be, because this industry can do a lot when it comes to healing the pain that our communities have suffered. So I just wanted to express that, and thank you for letting me.
Can I speak?
Steve?
I have to leave in a couple minutes. I'm sorry to be chomping at the bit, but I want to respond to a couple things that have been said in a swift manner, hopefully. Number one, we got to work backwards on what we're accomplishing here, and what Sharon has done so well, and other organizations like the Last Prisoner Project, is the first step is expunging records so people can get jobs. That's really, really important, and that has to be part of what we're doing. As regards Councilperson Jones' remarks, I agree with a lot of them. This is not a panacea. When big business shows up, it's sound and fury, and the little person gets left behind. And by no means is cannabis, there's no shortage of malarkey in legalized cannabis. Let's not kid. It's another business. And it's not, was the Music Man coming to town selling the band instruments? It's not that. But I think you guys are missing you're just not applying the general business things, which is the notion of storefront dispensaries is fleeting. Brick and mortar is fleeting. If we look at New Jersey, they allow home delivery. So the notion that if it doesn't come in this round, it will ultimately come. If we look at the Great Philadelphia Business GoPuff or other stuff like DoorDash, The consumer wants stuff delivered to their house. I wish we could have more storefronts, but it's a thing of the past, or will be soon enough. Number two, Councilperson Jones, that in all this legislation, there's an opt-out provisions. Municipalities can choose to opt out. We've seen it in New York State. A number of municipalities have said, I don't want adult use. You're not coming here. That exists. And theoretically, the city of Philadelphia could do it too if it really wanted to. When you said about intended and unintended consequences, Councilperson Jones, here's one consequence. People aren't smoking ditchweed. They're actually having stuff that's lab tested, so they have less chance of getting sick and ill and going to the hospital. And that's a pretty good thing. Councilperson Jones, what you talked about in terms of inebriation and driving thing is an unsettled issue. I just don't know. I've seen support on both sides. There's a range of cannabis, unlike alcohol, which without question impairs your ability to drive. Cannabis, there's a range of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, a large portion of the population is already smoking marijuana. There is, to my knowledge, no support for the proposition that once you bring in an adult use dispensary, that increases addiction or anything like that. I've seen no support for that whatsoever. I just don't think that's a supported premise. The worst thing that could happen is what I would call shrinkage. And shrinkage is a box of stuff that falls off a truck and goes into the wrong hands. But believe it or not, that's the one thing that can't happen in cannabis because they have a seed to sale tracking system. The moment the seed is planted to the moment it's sold, it is tracked by the state. And so the notion of that's going to, it just isn't true. Now, is cannabis addictive? I don't know. Do treatment centers help? I don't know that either. There's a lot of support that treatment centers themselves have a very low success rate in addiction. And courts are very fond of passing them out. I literally don't know. Finally, what Sharon said about California, she is right. About the city of Oakland. And California, half the marijuana consumed in America is consumed in California, the fifth largest economy in the world. But that's not the issue. California, each municipality can create their own laws. And I just think if we look at the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and every other state that's to the east of the Mississippi River, they just don't go that way. Especially in a Commonwealth. Usually you follow more of a state structure, although each county is its own fiefdom. It's just more statewide regulation. So I don't know enough about the home rule charter and what kind of latitude Philadelphia is going to have, but I suspect it's going to be more statewide. But I argue that is why we're here today, to get the state headed in the right direction. But and I'm sorry, Councilman Jones, if I was disrespectful when you were speaking. I'm also an old guy. I'm 57. And with that, I'm so very sorry, but I only budgeted an hour for this. So I would request to be excused.
Steve, can you please not leave? Just give us a few more minutes because Councilman O is teed up after Councilman Green. So he's the last council member teed up for this panel, please.
Well, I wouldn't do this for many people, but I'll do it for you. Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Let me just
thank you, Madam Chair. And I just say one last point because I want to allow Councilman O to speak. We didn't even touch on, although Steve did touch on Dozy, who I know as well, the whole non-plant touch perspective and industrial hemp, which doesn't even get into any of the Schedule 1 issues, which is a huge business opportunity that's now been monopolized in Kentucky by certain senators. And I'll leave that at that.
Very diplomatic, Councilmember Vice Chair Green. A chair recognizes Councilmember O.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. I think it is good that Steve stay on in case he has anything to say in rebuttal of what I'm about to say. I'll start with this. One size does not fit all. And I think it's very important because we have a system of local governments to ensure that what is done is proper for the people of their community. Philadelphia is the poorest big city in America. When you take the total population of African Americans, for example, since that was part of the topic of conversation, it's less than 14% of this country. 77% of this country is white. But that population of African Americans and other minorities are oftentimes found in our large cities. And I do think that it is a matter of haves versus the have-nots, the privileged versus the unprivileged. Like Councilman Curtis Jones, I was born and raised in West Philadelphia, Southwest to be exact. And of all the friends that I've had growing up during those gang war years that Councilman Curtis Jones is so familiar with, I can say that drugs, the use of drugs, any type of drugs, in their lives have been extremely detrimental because they started out in very poor conditions, in very dangerous situations, and there were not a lot of good opportunities. I then went to Central High School, where there were an equal number of, privileged kids and non-privileged kids, black and white, all sorts. But the fact that they had a Central High School jersey on or coat gave them a break from what would otherwise have been penalties that other kids would have suffered from. And when I went to college, which was an all-white college, the kids were great kids from great families with, doctors and lawyers and business people as parents. And they freely, if they chose to, engage in smoking marijuana, cocaine, mushrooms, and every other thing that they wanted to do without consequence. They went to graduate school, they eventually stopped doing drugs and have a great life. Where I live in Southwest Philadelphia, it is a neighborhood of a lot of crime, a lot of shootings, and a lot of unemployment. I do not encourage my kids whatsoever to smoke cigarettes, to drink alcohol, to use drugs, to go gambling. Not at all. And I don't encourage it for anyone else's kids. What I will say is that, yes, it is up to the voters, of course, but I find certain things very problematic. I'll just start with the opium wars in China. In the 1800s, Britain and France forcing merchants to sell opium in China. That was not good for China. Led to the downfall of China and international occupation, wars, and other things. I remember cocaine. That was the, quote, professional drug. It was expensive. Theoretically, they said didn't do harm. The drug of lawyers and movie stars. But it became available to anyone at $5 when it became crack. And it did not help people. Same thing. Councilman Curtis Jones talked about opioids. Well, those pills are far more expensive than what you can get on the street of Philadelphia in terms of heroin, high-grade quality heroin. And the fact that people have become addicted because of pills, they now can get the same high or better for cheaper on the streets of Philadelphia. So making drugs available legally does not address my concerns, and I supported medical marijuana. Yeah, the difference is that, yeah, certain controlled substances have beneficial consequences to those who use it, but under medical supervision. But when we make it recreational, there are those who will not be affected by it in any negative manner, and they tend to be well off in this society. They tend to have great futures. They tend to be well educated, and they have a great support system. But for those who are not well off, drug addiction has been extremely detrimental. I would also like to say that when people in this city consider the legalization of marijuana, I think they have to be given complete information. For example, if one of my wealthy friends were to give birth and had smoked a joint, I'm sure nothing would happen. But if someone from North Philly were to give birth in one of our hospitals and tested positive for marijuana, they would probably take her child. Department of Human Services, Child Protective Services. And, people have said, well, I thought marijuana was decriminalized in Philadelphia. What I tell them is, one, it's not decriminalized. It's still a crime. That's state law. And even if it is decriminalized, it doesn't mean that an agency will not remove your children from you and put them in foster care. And that does happen. I have a lot of those type of cases where someone tested positive for marijuana. They didn't, in their case, say they smoked, but they were around people who smoked, and they lost their children. So there's going to have to be a reconciliation within this entire system. If there's going to be a legalization of marijuana, then if someone tests positive for marijuana, then there should be no adverse consequences to them within the entire legal system of this state. So finally, I will say that I think about the numbers. And how lucrative it was that Dulce Schultz decided to get in on the action. And eventually, after organized crime took over the numbers, the government took over the numbers. And the promise that this is going to create jobs and opportunities for minorities is historical in the sense that is constantly said to get votes. But they don't have the money or the wherewithal to compete against big business and people who have easy access to money and attorneys and everything else to build those huge businesses. But in order to get the votes, you have to convince the voters that there's something in it for them. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Councilmember O. And Councilmember O, I just want to state for the record, and Steve, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond, but I want to say, Councilmember O, point well taken. But we know that if legalization of recreational marijuana occurs, it won't be by a vote of the City Council of Philadelphia, right?
I do know that, yes.
Right. The Pennsylvania General Assembly is the entity that will determine, along with the governor, whether or not we legalize recreational marijuana in our Commonwealth. However, if it does occur, I would rather, and then as Stephen and Sharon, you guys have been giving me a great education. I don't know, maybe all of the other committee members, they're experts in this. I'm not. So you're giving me an education today. If in fact that is the decision that the General Assembly and the governor makes, I would want to ensure that all of the barriers to entry that you just talked about, Councilmember O, that you heard me mention earlier, right? When Steve said he's teaching over at Stockton, and I'm thinking about, what about the brothers and sisters who have been in this underground economy and they don't even have a high school diploma, right? But they have an interest, and maybe this is a way that, through an apprenticeship program that is custom designed and removes all barriers to entry, like if you have a criminal record or something like that, that would give them access to the opportunity. So from that perspective, Councilmember O, I think this is a real healthy dialogue for us to be able to flush those things out. But what you said, I think is very important for the record. Steve, you want to respond?
A couple of things. Council personnel, I want to talk about the foundation of some of your points that I don't quite agree with. So I think the devil's in the details, and we really, really got to drill down a bit here. So number one, actually, you don't get tested for marijuana. You get tested for the presence of THC in your system. The testing is pretty, at this point, not so great. So what happened, it can hang in your system for 5 or 6 days. Further, there's all kinds of other, and the constituent elements of cannabis, and cannabis is 3 different plants, the indica, the sativa, and the ruderalis. It throws off 120 different things, one of which is THC, which inebriates you, one of which is CBD, which is legal. So it's conceivable that someone could be using legal CBD and come up on that testing and get flagged. So I think that's an important distinction. The notion that cannabis is a gateway drug, I think, has fairly been debunked at this point. I'm not saying that people who don't do addictive things also did marijuana. They also drank milk, probably. So I just don't think the evidence tends to support you. I think that the notion that for those who are well off are less prone to the negative things in society is absolutely merited. But that goes for everything. Cars, alcohol. I mean, it's just not fair. And that's kind of what we're trying to change now. But everything I'm saying is irrelevant. And nothing what I'm saying matters, because it's coming. Whether we choose to do it the right way is the only issue. Adult use will be here at some time as medical is here. And the reason why is because we have alcohol here. It's that simple. If Jersey and New York, Maryland will be there, it's going to happen. Now, at this point, it almost doesn't matter what I say because I am irrelevant. Every time the second hand on my watch, I'm an old guy, I have a watch, ticks, someone is born and someone dies. And at this point, 78% of Americans, not voters, but 78% of Americans support adult use legislation. And by the end of the day, the numbers will be even higher because our children and our grandchildren are born into a world where it wasn't illegal. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Don't have to believe me, believe my watch. I want to do this correctly. It is not perfect. You're right. Marijuana has our share of charlatans and then some. That's where we come in. We do it the right way. Is it perfect? Nope. Is it going to cure all problems? Nope. But can it be better? Yeah, it can. And Sharon has given examples of stuff. And if this are on the ballot in November in 6 months, it can be even better still. There's a lot of light and there's accountability. And one of the benefits is the diminution of the negatives. Again, the key isn't making people entrepreneurs. The key is giving people job skills and giving them wages. That's going to be the most beneficial thing. Everything else is nice, but that's where the meaty part of the curve is. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve and Sharon. Let me just tell you, you all gave us an education today, and I don't know if Councilmember Green will bring you back at any time, but I know I have about 3 pages of notes, right? Felt like I'm back in school taking notes again. So thank you so very much for your testimony, and I would just want to make sure for the record that no more members of the committee have any questions for this panel or comments. With that being said, thank you, Steve and Sharon, for your testimony. We greatly appreciate your being here. Rachel, thank you. Sharon, thank you as well. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
With that being said, Rachel, will you please call the next panel and witnesses scheduled to give testimony?
So there are no more witnesses for these 2 legislative items. We're now ready to move on to the next bill.
Okay, so let me formally just note for the record, is there anyone else here to testify on a bill and resolution whose name has not yet been called? I did my work, Mike Decker. With that being said and hearing none, we will now move on to bill number 210249. Before Rachel calls the first panel, I would like to call on our colleague, Councilmember Brooks, to offer opening comments.
All right. It's still morning. Yep. Good morning, Madam Chair and colleagues. I just want to kind of open up this conversation about coercive control and talk about how domestic violence and how people view domestic violence by allowing this bill to pass through committee and essentially through legislation. We offer folks that suffer from domestic violence a sense of freedom. And when I say freedom, freedom to live, freedom to identify and openly speak about the pre-entry towards physical violence. So we have spoken to several folks, worked with Women Against Abuse, as well as talked to Deputy Mayor Laser in reference to this legislation. And I had spoken on it before because it impacts me personally, because I have a cousin who was killed due to domestic violence. And it started with coercive control, her inability to live freely, go to work, or even connect with family. So thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing this opportunity to move forward on this legislation. And I yield the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Council Member Brooks. And when you introduced, this legislation and you gave your opening remarks during that time, I know you touched every single member of our body because of your real-time, real-life experiences, and we thank you for even exhibiting the strength and having the courage to publicly note that this is an issue that needs to be addressed and no one's exempt. It can touch anybody. So thank you so very much, colleague. We appreciate it. With that being said, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify on bill number 210249?
I believe Councilman O might have a comment.
I'm sorry. I apologize, Council Member. I wasn't in the chat. Chair recognizes Council Member O for comment.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairwoman. I do appreciate Council Member Brooks's bill. I 100% support the intention of what she's trying to do. I am going to say at the very beginning of this, so it may get addressed by panelists or others, but I do have a concern. As an attorney, I have handled many of these types of cases. I will say that, for example, domestic abuse and protection from abuse orders includes people in the household. It includes parents. So if there's an issue between a parent and their child, they are subject to domestic abuse laws as well. My concern about coercive control is in this language because what it says is that domestic violence, and this is the existing definition, means the occurrence of one or more of the following acts between family or household members, sexual or intimate partners, or persons who share biological parenthood. The added language, however, coercive control, meaning a pattern of behavior that in purpose or effect unreasonably interferes with another person's free will and personal liberty. Examples of coercive control include, but are not limited to, unreasonably engaging in any of the following, and that includes isolating the other person from friends or other sources of support, depriving the person of basic necessities, controlling, regulating, or monitoring the other person's movements, communications, daily behaviors, finances, economic resources, or access to services. That's 1, 2, and 3. I don't have a problem with subsection 4. I just want to ensure that we are not talking about parents regulating their children. And even for adult children who are living in their parents' household, of course, when we're talking about beatings, that type of thing, when we're getting into someone who is a minor or someone who is even adult living with their mother and father or their mother or their father, and they are being subject to the parental controls, I don't want there to be confusion that is somehow improper. So that is my concern, and I hope it gets addressed. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Council Member O, for that perspective. And I'm glad you were able to note it at the beginning, and hopefully for any of the panel members who are testifying, if you have anything that could help bring some clarity to Council Member O's concerns, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, with that in mind, Rachel, will you please call the first panel we have to testify today? today on Bill number 210249.
Rich Laser and Elise Sosha.
Good morning. I see both of you here. You are connected. I want you to please feel free to state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. And we'll start with Mr. Laser.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Parker and members of the committee. My name is Richard Laser. I am Deputy Mayor of Labor, and I appear before you today to testify on Bill number 210249. This bill is an amendment to Chapter 9-4100 of the Philadelphia Code, promoting healthy family and workplaces, and a corresponding amendment to Chapter 9-3200, entitlement of leave due to domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. It will amend the definition of domestic violence to include coercive control. Coercive control is defined in the bill as a pattern of behavior that is a purpose or effort unreasonably interferes with another person's free will or personal liberty. This amended definition will allow the use of paid and unpaid sick leave for individuals affected by coercive control. Understanding that domestic violence includes not only physical violence, but also an array of other damaging behaviors that could affect a person's well-being and safety, the administration wholeheartedly supports this bill and is ready to enforce it. I'd like to thank Councilmember Brooks for introducing this bill and for working with us on it, and I look forward to answering any questions that any of you may have at this time.
Thank you. Elisa, you can proceed with your testimony. Just state your name for the record.
Sure. My name is Elise Sosha, and I'm the Chief of Staff at Women Against Abuse. And thank you, Chairmember Parker, and really all the members of the committee. Looking at the committee roster, this is a committee of folks who are really invested in supporting victims of domestic violence in our community, and I really want to express my appreciation for your leadership in that regard. I also want to take a moment to thank tremendously Councilmember Brooks for sharing the memory of her cousin Tiana with us all. I know that Council has been touched not only by Councilmember Brooks's sharing of Tiana's story, but by other losses close to Council's heart, including that of Linda Rios just a couple years ago. And it's always our hope that we can honor these treasured members of our community by doing better. And it's in that vein that I'm really honored to be here with you all today regarding this piece of legislation. Women Against Abuse, as many of you know, is Philadelphia's largest domestic violence and service provider and advocacy agency. We serve approximately, on average, 11,500 folks each year in our community through safe housing, legal representations, prevention, and advocacy. As many of you know, and I want to take a minute to frame out this conversation, the COVID-19 pandemic has been an especially frightening time for victims of domestic violence. Our shelters and our legal services have remained in operation throughout the pandemic, and our teams have been working tirelessly to ensure that there is no service interruption for our clients. Yet across almost all of our programs, our service numbers are down. While I wish that I could say that I think this is a positive indicator, the truth is likely far worse. Victims who would normally reach out for help are trapped in homes with abusive partners with limited access to support where they would normally get it, from school, from friends, from physicians, from faith communities, from us, from you all. Callers who do reach out to us on the hotline are sharing that they're home with abusers. Their calls are more frantic, they're shorter, there are more hang-ups and more abrupt endings. Quite frankly, we are terrified about what might be happening in these homes behind closed doors. I think that's an especially important setup for today's conversation, and it's with that lens that I approach this legislation today, and I ask you all to do the same. The language of coercive control itself is not new to the domestic violence movement, and it's pretty commonly used in the movement, but also in the UK, and becoming more popular in the US as states like Hawaii and New York and others have passed or are considering coercive control legislation. This shift is based on the scholarly work of Professor Evan Stark, who has held professorships both here and in the UK, who in 2007 defined coercive control as a strategic course of oppressive behavior. You'll notice that this categorizes behavior as a decision that an abuser is making as opposed to some momentary loss of control. It characterizes it as ongoing rather than episodic or incidental. And like others have mentioned, it's based on multiple tactics of abuse that include not only physical and emotional violence, but intimidation, degradation, isolation, and control. Coercive control, as Councilmember Brooks said, is really a violation of rights and liberties, and this is really commonly what we see in our experiences with our clients. Like one of our clients who shared that My abuser told me no one else was going to love me as much as he did, that I would never be good enough for anyone else, and accused me of cheating. I started to believe that I was really worthless. I cut my hair short, started wearing baseball caps and baggy clothing. Eventually, I did not leave the house at all. Or another who shared that her husband prevented her from accessing information about her immigration status and from learning English in order to maintain control over her. When the abuse in that relationship reached a boiling point, she desperately fled her home with her children, leaving all of her belongings behind. Wouldn't it be nice to support her before that had to happen? Or another shelter client who shared that she would have been killed if she hadn't physically jumped over a railing to her neighbor's porch and hidden inside a porch, especially after her abuser prevented her from using a phone to call for help. Understanding the dynamics of not just of violence, but of coercive control that are present in these relationships provides us additional opportunities to recognize and be responsive to victims. I want to mention that as a community, we are all working to better serve survivors through multiple interventions. And especially in this moment of reckoning for our city and movement, it is absolutely critical that we are investing in solutions that do not rely on the legal criminal justice system that we know is failing our survivors of color, particularly our Black survivors. Philadelphia can be a leader here, is a leader, and can continue to be a leader by focusing on strategies that address violence and abuse earlier and more often, perhaps before it's reaching a lethal boiling point, to allow for additional opportunities for victims to seek and receive support that is meaningful to them without creating fear of additional harm. Time away from work to see a doctor or a domestic violence counselor without fear of losing their job or foregoing income that is critical for their family. I really urge you to use this moment to be responsive to the experiences of our neighbors and support today's legislation. I thank you all for your time and leadership. And again, I really want to thank Councilmember Brooks for her advocacy on behalf of not only her cousin and her family, but on behalf of all victims of our community. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you both so very much for your testimony. Chair recognizes Councilmember Brooks for a question. And if any of our colleagues have any comments, please get in queue right now, because we don't want to lose our quorum as members have other meetings. So we want to make sure that we can actually get to a vote today. Chair recognizes Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My first question is for Deputy Mayor Laser. How will the Office of Labor update employers and the workforce and inform them about this expanded protection?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. I mean, we have aggressively upped our outreach efforts on all our bills and all the laws that we enforce. We definitely update all our handouts and posters that we give to businesses and worker organizations. We would update our trainings that we do for workers themselves so they know what their rights are and what they can use and how to have these laws protect them. But also when we do our training with businesses through the chambers, the different chambers through the city, and also even through commercial corridors and our work with commerce. So we have a multifaceted way. We reach out to employees and employers to let them know what their rights are. And we would do that on this specific case as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your office's willingness to make those updates and to participate in the outreach that it takes to educate, Philadelphia about the protections under this legislation. I really appreciate that.
Great, because I mean, enforcement is extremely important, but outreach I would think, is more important because people need to know their rights and what they can and can't do, and I think this helps them. And I think knowledge is power, and the more knowledge we can give to workers and to businesses, the better we will be.
Absolutely. Just me trying to explain what coercive control is. Once folks understood what it was, they was like, oh, I didn't know that was something that, that we can even put on the record. So thank you for your work in getting that information out there.
Thank you.
My next question is for Ms. Scotia. I want to thank you for all of your work highlighting this legislation and testifying to provide counsel and the public with a sense of how incidents of domestic violence have been playing out over the pandemic. And it's helpful. It's also alarming to get confirmation that people experiencing abuse have been even further isolated from traditional support systems throughout this pandemic. But can you describe a situation where you might educate a caller about the rights and protection under this legislation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that question, Councilmember Brooks. So the good thing about the Domestic Violence Service Provider Network in Philadelphia is that we really attempt to make it so that there's no wrong door for a victim who's attempting to access support. So that might mean that someone has seen us at a tabling event, picked up a hotline call and called the hotline. So we have hotline counselors on 24/7. We have some bilingual counselors, but also can connect with Language Line to make sure we're supporting victims in whatever language is useful to them. And what happens so often is that victims will start describing what their experience is. And to Deputy Mayor Laser's point, the victims aren't necessarily coming with, "Hey, I'm experiencing coercive control," right? They're coming with, "This is what's, I couldn't reach out for this help. Do you know anybody who can provide me with XYZ?" And at that time, that is a really good opportunity to rely on the service provider community here as experts and saying, these are the rights that are available to you, just as they would these existing ordinances without the expanded definition, right? Like it's not necessarily the truth that victims are coming and saying, "Hey, I'd like to use the Promoting Healthy Families bill." Instead, we would have that conversation on the hotline. CLS, PLA, all of these legal aid agencies who are working with folks who are not necessarily coming for domestic violence services, but might be coming for another issue related to housing or whatever else, also are schooled and trained in understanding what these protections are and would be able to describe that benefit to them. A cool thing about the pandemic, if there is one, is we've been able to transition some of our healthy relationships curricula that we usually do in schools to a virtual setting. What's kind of a nice opportunity in that space is that parents are listening, or caregivers are listening, or even older siblings are listening, are home, and kind of understanding the messaging that our educators are providing to the sometimes 11, 12, 13-year-olds. So they're sometimes entering in questions, and we can provide these kind of tips and tricks, and ultimately we're usually funneling folks to the hotline. But all that to say, Councilmember Brooks, I think that's a big responsibility of the provider community to be supporting the victims in whatever it is that they need support around.
Thank you so much for testifying and helping Philadelphia to expand their understanding of the root causes of domestic violence and working with me and my office to educate the public about this pervasive issue. I have no further questions, but I would also like to, at this time, thank my school sponsors of this legislation, the chairwoman for having this hearing, Councilmember Heenan for his support in this legislation, as well as I'm sorry. Yes, and like I mentioned, this issue is important to myself and my family, and for the countless people that are experiencing domestic violence around the city. So thank you so much for that. I also that ends my question. I do have a few comments, Madam Chair. I want to address Councilmember Old's concern. That is, this expanded definition will be enforced against parents and caretakers. So while drafting this legislation, with the law department, we discussed this exact issue you described. Given that this is a definitional amendment, there is no need to limit guardianship of relationships. What creates a coercive control relationship is the mind frame of the individual affected, so parents and guardian relationships are not implicated by this amendment. In order to be able to use the protections in this code, like the need to use, leave, or obtain flexibility in a lease term. So I want to thank you for your question and your concern. I think it may have been answered.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate your explanation. It'll save me a question, Chairwoman. If I could have this,
Sure. One second. I just wanted to make sure, Councilmember Brooks, are you finished?
Yes, I think that concludes.
Okay. Now that I know you are finished, the chair recognizes Councilmember O for comments.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yeah, that is my concern. There's a couple things that concern me. Is, for example, many of us have been engaged in interventions, especially when we're talking about children, high schoolers, even young adults, particularly when they become drug addicted. When they're in abusive relationships, those type of things. And we support parents who are, in a very difficult, trying to address those concerns. I'm not saying there aren't bad parents or things like that. I'm just saying that it is probably more normal than not that parents who are at the forefront of trying to do the best for their children when others won't, get engaged in some pretty tough situations. It is challenging for me to understand. So I do know this is a leave bill. So if someone says, hey, I'm really having a hard time, my parents are controlling me, they're cutting off, that's a leave issue. But in the definition of coercive, I don't see that is what's contemplated. I'm concerned that what makes parenting, being there in the most difficult situations, the most challenging situations, and trying to deal with it as a parent becomes defined as coercive control. So that is my concern. I'm concerned enough to say that I would like to see some clarification in the definition. I understand what you just said about the law department, but it doesn't change what the definition is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O, for your comments. And I'm trying to hold on to a quorum with all these other competing meetings. So let me just ask, are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Hearing none, is there anyone else here to testify on the bill whose name has not yet been called? Hearing none, I want to say a very special thank you to Mr. Laser and Elise. I don't want to chop up your last name, so that's why I'm just going to say thank you, Elise. Thank you both so very much for being here. This concludes the hearing, and we will now go into the public meeting. Again, are there any final questions or comments from members of the committee? There being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I will ask if there's anyone else present in this hearing whose name we have failed to call and that wishes to offer testimony on any of the bills or resolutions being considered today. Hearing none, I want to thank all of the panels and witnesses for their participation today. We value your opinions. I now invite all panels and witnesses to please disconnect from the meeting before we go into our public meeting. We will now, just briefly pause the proceedings as multiple participants leave the hearing. I don't think we had too many on. With that being said, this concludes the public hearing of the committee on Bill, on Bill 210206, 210249, and Resolution number 210215. We will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on these legislative matters. We will now reconvene the public meeting, and we will call the roll. This public meeting is formally convened. Rachel, will you please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on the screen when you speak.
Vice Chair Derek Green.
Present.
Councilmember Cindy Bass.
Good afternoon. I am present.
Councilmember David O.
Present.
Councilmember Helen Gim.
I am present.
Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez.
Present.
Councilmember Mark Squilla. And we are still joined by Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on bill number 210206.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 210206 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Is there a second?
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Council Member Gim seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that bill number 210206 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on resolution number 210215.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that resolution 210215 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Gim seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that resolution number 210215 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on the amendment to bill number 210249.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I offer an amendment to bill number 210249. A copy of the amendment has been circulated to all members of this committee. I move that the amendment to bill number 210249 be approved.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Gim seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendment to bill number 210249 be approved. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries, and the amendment to bill number 210249 has been approved. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on bill number 210249 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that bill number 210249 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council.
Second.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Gim seconds the motion. It has been moved and properly seconded that bill number 210249 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. The chair recognizes Councilmember Green for a motion on resolution number 210295.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the public hearing and public meeting on resolution number 210295 stand in recess until Thursday, April 22nd at 1:00 p.m.
Second.
It's been moved in, well, the chair notes for the record that that was seconded by Councilmember Gim. It has been moved and properly seconded that the public hearing and public meeting of this committee on resolution number 210295 be recessed until Thursday, April 22nd, 2021 at 1 p.m. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the public hearing and public meeting on resolution number 210295 will stand in recess until Thursday, April 22nd, 2021 at 1 p.m., at which time we will reconvene on Microsoft Teams. This concludes the business before the Committee on Law and Government today. I want to thank you all, the committee members. Thank you for staying with us. We know that there were competing meetings taking place, but you stayed with us and allowed us to do our business, and for that, we're grateful. grateful. We'll see you all tomorrow at 1 p.m. Have a good day.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great job.
Great job. Have a great day, everyone.